And if you are unable to do that, then you will not have the spiritual organs necessary to be able to interpret higher information. First of all, I do want to dispel the narrative that the occult are some evil, demonic, secular group that only perpetuate the downfall of the human race and witchcraft and all of that nonsense. I actually think that fundamentally that narrative comes out of a place of lack of understanding, because if you actually delve into the material, you'll realize that a lot of their secrets, quote unquote, and a lot of their teachings and information is fundamentally grounded in a lot of other ancient religions and communities, namely Hinduism. And I'm going to share one secret with you this evening. I'll be reading from the book Conquest of the Serpent. Hope you can all see that. And that comes from the same author as the Coiled Serpent. And I came across this chapter called Occult Reasons for things like sexual restraint, celibacy, semen retention, and seeing as the last video I made on the subject matter was very well received, I thought I would add a sequel. I'm going to be reading a secret called The Mysterious Force. Now, the chapter begins by saying it is well known that one of the functions of the spinal cord is to serve as a transmission line for the currents of nerve force by which messages, reflexes, impulses are carried out from all parts of the body to the brain and vice versa. However, it is less generally recognized that the brain and the gonads are particularly closely linked by a force that acts as a conduit that runs along the spine. So that is a curious opening paragraph, I'm sure all of you will agree. And the meaning trying to be conveyed here is that although there is this narrative that we as human beings are the inception point of our thoughts, let's say, that we experience life from the top down, we can also experience life from the bottom up. We are more of a receiving station for information, like an antenna. And one of the core areas that we primarily gather information is from the bottom up. And this is where it makes reference to the gonads. So we have here that the brain can gain these functions if it is nourished by a force that is coming up from the gonads. So your testicles, your balls, your sexual energy, that kind of basin, that ocean of energy beneath yourself moving up towards the brain. If that force fails to come up on the account of being misdirected at its source and squandered in sensuality, so again, another reference there to sexual energy, this idea that our procreative essence is valuable, has energy, has value, and can be used for other reasons other than procreation, but regeneration. The brain's capacity is impaired if, in addition, some of one's mental energy is misspent on erotic imaginations whereby sexually stimulating impulses are sent down to the gonads. Then the brain is doubtedly losing. A little reference there to the idea of entertaining fantasies and promiscuity, and geez, it's hard enough for the Western man to just refrain from the physical act of losing his sexual energy, but again, this you can start to see the similarities here between the yogic teachings, especially things like brahmacharya, which are so strict in their teachings of how one should conduct himself with his let's say sexual behavior. Now here we come to the biggest secret that kind of links the two together. So there seems to be a very mysterious force which, when activated, moves up along the spine. Extensive information about the transcendental force called Kundalini, or the Serpent fire, can be found in the works of Oriental esoteric philosophy, so Eastern philosophy. Now, Kundalini, if you're not familiar with that term, I'm sure many of you are, but it refers to a great snake that lies coiled at the base of your spine by the root chakra, as the the yogis would interpret. But in terms of a biological perspective, you can know this as your sacrum, your sacral spine, and that is where the wealth of your sexual energy lies. You can also draw connotations to this idea of the Holy Grail. If you look at your pelvis, your pelvic bone, it's shaped like a grail, and I don't want to digress into this idea of drinking from the Holy Grail, but you can see how comparisons can be made across different religions and stories. But I'll move on here. It is described as originating in a chakra, a psychic nerve center located at the base of the spine, near and closely linked with the gonads, where in most people it lies and remains latent. There's no energy down there in the Western man. He's been spent, he's drained, he's continually sending that energy out of himself instead of raising it up. But if aroused, it rises up along the spine, invigorating several other chakras on its way, until it reaches and enlivens the highest centers of spirituality in the head, bringing enlightenment to the individual. Some bold claims there, some big claims, perhaps something to be skeptical about, I'm sure, but if you see these similarities across many of these different teachings, and even the idea of celibacy in religious cultures, then this idea starts to hold more and more weight. And you can see, every man watching this video knows how powerful his sexual energy is. There's no doubt in my mind that you know that, and it's probably gotten you in your fair share of trouble. And although this particular secret is esoteric in nature, I wanted to dispel this idea that there's something negative around the occult and occultism, and that it is viewed in such a lens that is barbaric and condemning to the human race. But rather it is from the perspective of someone who maybe isn't too, let's say, indulgent in religious ideas. I know religion can be a very divisive term, but the occult are spiritual scientists. That's the best way to think about them. And going back to this idea of, if you want to move in this direction of your life, in pursuing spiritual science, that might be something that you are interested in. And in order to access that plane of spirituality, it is fundamentally taught in occultism that you are unable to even open the door to that reality until you have mastered your energies. And the same thing in yoga. They call it Kriya Yoga, mastering your energies. And if you are unable to do that, then you will not have the spiritual organs necessary to be able to interpret higher information. The analogy that you can use is, there are things in the world that we know exist, but we don't have the biological senses to be able to perceive that. Things like high frequency radio waves and X-rays and all the other lights on the light spectrum. We don't have the senses to be able to interpret that. We have tools that can detect it, but we don't have those senses. In the same way, if you cannot use the energy in you and conserve it and exercise it and build up your inner perception of those subtle energies, then you will be unable to get to a point where you're looking at developing skills like remote viewing, like telepathy, if you believe in that kind of thing. But again, we're spiritual scientists. So with that being said, I think that's an interesting note to kind of end the video on. I hope you enjoyed this evening's video, and if you subscribe to anything of what I've said here, then you can subscribe to me, and I'll see you again very soon.